He had everything: power, money, respect. Nathan Caldwell, the billionaire CEO who built an empire from steel and glass, lived in a world where emotions were weaknesses and silence was strength. Until one ordinary morning, he saw her. A photo of Evelyn Moore, his former assistant, laughing in a simple swimsuit under the Florida sun. The woman who once challenged him in meetings, who left without looking back, now radiant, free, and far from his reach. Why did that single picture shatter a man who owned the world? Was it jealousy? Or something deeper? What happens when success can no longer silence the heart? From the stormy boardrooms of Seattle to the quiet beaches of Coral Bay. This is the story of two souls, torn apart by ambition and reunited by forgiveness. A journey through pride, loss, and the kind of love that doesn't need to be spoken to be felt. Because sometimes, the richest man is the one who finally learns to feel. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Shining Stories, where every story reminds us the human heart is the most powerful thing we own. The rain hadn't stopped all morning in Seattle. It drummed softly against the glass walls of Caldwell Tower, 60 floors of steel, glass, and quiet authority. Inside the top-floor office, Nathan Caldwell, 58, sat behind his walnut desk, surrounded by the silent hum of screens displaying the empire he had built. Numbers, graphs, markets, everything under his control. Everything, except his own heart. He reached for his coffee, black, lukewarm, when a soft ping broke the silence. A notification. Another headline. At first, he ignored it, thinking it was just another article about tech stocks or market predictions. But then his assistant's voice echoed faintly through the intercoms. There's something you might want to see. It's trending. He opened the link. And for a moment, time froze. There she was, Evelyn Moore, smiling. The photo wasn't scandalous, not really. Just Evelyn, standing on a sunlit beach somewhere in Florida. Her hair was loose, her face bare, her laughter caught mid-motion as if the ocean breeze itself had stolen it from her. She wore a simple blue bikini, nothing extravagant. But that smile, that radiant, unguarded smile, hit him like a punch to the chest. He hadn't seen that smile in 3 years. Not since the morning she walked out of his office, leaving her ID badge on the desk and saying quietly, "I need to live a life that isn't built around your calendar. Mr. Caldwell." That was all. No arguments. No tears. Just the soft sound of dignity closing the door behind her. Nathan leaned back in his chair, his breath shallow. Outside, the rain kept falling, tracing crooked rivers down the glass. The reflection of Evelyn's image shimmered faintly in it, a ghost from another life. The internet, of course, was doing what it did best, twisting something simple into a spectacle. Billionaire's former aide spotted in Florida looks happier than ever. One caption read, "Rumors about past relationship with Caldwell," another speculated. He closed the tab, but it was too late. The image had burned itself into his mind. He tried to focus on the quarterly report on his desk. The words blurred. His hand trembled slightly. He'd been called many things in his life: ruthless, brilliant, impossible, but never jealous. Until now. He rose from his chair and walked toward the window. Seattle spread out below him, gray and endless. From up here, he could see everything: the harbor, the highways, the cranes. Yet he felt utterly blind. What was she doing there? Who took that picture? The thought of someone else standing beside her. Hearing that laugh, it twisted something deep in his gut. For a man who'd spent a lifetime making decisions worth billions, he suddenly couldn't decide what to do with his hands. He wanted to call her. He wanted to delete her number. He wanted to forget, but couldn't. He remembered her last day, the quiet office, the faint scent of her perfume, the sound of her pen clicking nervously as she handed him her resignation letter. He had wanted to stop her then, to say, "Don't go." But pride had been stronger than love. He had simply nodded and said, "If that's what you need, Miss Moore, I won't stand in your way." She smiled politely, that professional, distant smile she used when she didn't want him to see she was hurting, and left. And after that, he never saw her again. Until today, Nathan sat back down, staring at the blank reflection of his monitor. His empire meant nothing in that moment. He could buy any company, acquire any rival, but he couldn't buy back time. He couldn't undo the distance between Seattle and a sun-washed Florida shore. Still, something inside him stirred something reckless, almost boyish. He opened his calendar. There was a full week of board meetings, calls, and negotiations. He clicked cancel all. Then, he opened a travel site and typed Seattle to Tampa, one-way ticket. As he waited for the confirmation, his pulse quickened. It was madness. He knew it. He didn't even know what he'd say to her. "I saw your photo and lost my mind, ridiculous." And yet, he couldn't not go. Something stronger than reason was pulling him across the map, a gravity that had been waiting 3 years to take hold again. He looked once more at the photo, the sunlight on her skin, the waves curling around her feet, the way she looked like she had finally exhaled. That was what broke him, that she had found peace, and he hadn't. The intercom buzzed again. "Sir, are you leaving early?" "Yes," he said quietly. "Should I tell the board you'll be back tomorrow?" He paused, staring at the reflection of the rain against the window. "No. Don't tell them anything yet." He grabbed his coat, ignoring the surprised looks from his staff as he stepped into the private elevator. The city outside was still drowning in drizzle, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel cold. He felt awake. Down on the street, the traffic hissed over wet asphalt. Nathan's driver looked startled when he said he'd take a cab instead. As the door shut, the city faded behind him like a gray photograph, while something unnamed, regret, jealousy, hope began to take shape. He didn't know what waited for him in Florida. He didn't even know if she'd want to see him. But as the cab merged onto the highway toward the airport, Nathan looked out at the storm-heavy sky and whispered, almost to himself, "You can't build an empire big enough to escape what you feel." Hours later, at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, he stood by the window, watching planes take off into the night. The terminal lights reflected in his eyes, restless, unsteady. When his boarding call echoed overhead, he didn't hesitate. Nathan Caldwell booked the first flight to Florida. But jealousy wasn't the only thing waiting for him there. The jet descended through a blanket of clouds, and Nathan Caldwell felt the plane tremble as it broke into sunlight. The light was almost blinding after the gray of Seattle, a sudden, unapologetic brightness that seemed to mock his sleepless night. He hadn't planned what to say. He hadn't even decided why he was here. But as the Florida coastline unfolded beneath him, blue ocean, white sand, palms swaying lazily, he realized how far he'd traveled from the world he knew. Seattle was a city of glass and thunderclouds, built on ambition. Florida looked like it was built on forgiveness. For 30 years, Nathan's world had been made of metal and glass. Caldwell Tower, his headquarters, rose above the city like a crown of mirrors. From his penthouse at the top, 6,000 square feet of silence, he could see everything: the bay, the skyline, the ships leaving port at dawn. But no one ever saw him. At night, when the city lights blurred into fog, he'd stand by the floor-to-ceiling window with a glass of scotch, watching planes crawl across the sky. Sometimes he wondered if one of them carried Evelyn, leaving for some place that didn't demand perfection. He never admitted that thought out loud. He buried it beneath meetings, deadlines, and profits. The penthouse had everything: a grand piano he never played, a wine cellar he never opened, and walls lined with abstract art that meant nothing to him. His cleaning staff came twice a week. They never saw him smile. The refrigerator was always half empty, stocked only with bottled water, black coffee, and almond milk. He told himself it was efficiency. But deep down, he knew it was emptiness disguised as discipline. People envied his life. Yet when the elevator doors closed each evening, taking him to the top floor, he felt like a prisoner returning to his cell. He'd built an empire that could buy silence, but not peace. Maybe success had made him blind, he thought. Maybe she left because he stopped seeing her as a person, hundreds of miles away. Evelyn Moore was finishing her morning class at Coral Bay Art Center. The classroom smelled of paint and ocean breeze. Children gathered around long tables, their laughter echoing off the pastel walls. She walked among them, her white linen dress splattered with streaks of color, her bare feet tapping softly against the wooden floor. "Remember," she told a young boy struggling with his brush. "There's no wrong way to paint the sea. It moves. It changes. Just like you." The boy smiled, dipping his brush into blue again. Evelyn leaned against the window, watching the waves roll beyond the dunes. The sunlight poured across her face, warm and forgiving. In this little town of Coral Bay, time moved differently. The air was thick with salt and possibility. Fishermen nodded to her when she walked past. The woman who ran the coffee shop, Mrs. Langford, always saved her a slice of lemon pie. It wasn't the life she'd dreamed of, but it was the life she chose. When she'd left Seattle, she'd sworn never to look back. She donated most of her suits, sold her car, and packed her belongings into 2 suitcases and a canvas bag of paintbrushes. For the first 6 months, she couldn't stop checking her phone, waiting for a message from Nathan that never came. By the 7th month, she stopped waiting. By the 8th, she started breathing again. Now, 3 years later, she had found rhythm in simplicity. Her days began with coffee and seagulls. Her nights ended with sketchbooks filled with small joys, faces of her students, shells she found on the beach, the patterns of waves. But sometimes, just before sleep, a faint memory would return his voice, calm and distant, saying, "You're the only one who ever tells me no." She'd smile, shake it away, and remind herself you can't paint light if you keep living in the dark. Nathan checked into a small resort just outside town. No marble floors, no glass towers, just a row of cottages facing the ocean. The air smelled of coconut and sunscreen. Somewhere nearby, a radio played soft country music. He found it oddly comforting. That night, sitting on the porch with the ocean whispering beyond the dunes, He opened his laptop out of habit. Emails flooded the screen, reminders, requests, financial updates. He closed it after 10 seconds. The world could wait. He leaned back and listened to the wind. Somewhere, a woman laughed, that carefree sound of life unmeasured by ambition. It reminded him of her again. He thought about the first day he hired Evelyn. She'd walked into his office wearing a gray suit and an expression of quiet determination. Most assistants he'd had before were eager to please, afraid to disagree. Evelyn wasn't. She had this calm way of saying no, not defiant, not timid, just firm, as if she knew what mattered and what didn't. It had unsettled him and intrigued him. Now, sitting in this small Florida town, Nathan wondered how many no's he had ignored, not just from her, but from life itself. He reached for his phone again, scrolling through old contacts. Her number was still there. He'd never deleted it. His thumb hovered over it, trembling slightly. Then he sighed, locked the screen, and stared at the stars instead. They looked different here closer, as if the sky itself bent lower to listen. Meanwhile, Evelyn was cleaning brushes at the sink when her colleague Caleb poked his head in. Heading to the festival tomorrow, he asked. They're lighting lanterns at the pier. She smiled. Wouldn't miss it. Good. He grinned. You could use a little magic. After he left, she turned off the light. The studio bathed in moonlight. She paused by the window, gazing at the horizon. For a second, she thought she saw a plane's light glimmering far away, a silver spark crossing the sky. She didn't know that inside it, a man was crossing his own storm to find her again. The ocean roared softly through the night, indifferent yet eternal. Two souls, one carved by ambition, one shaped by peace, now stood beneath the same stars. The world was about to pull them back together, not by fate, but by the consequences of choices long made. And as the wind swept over the Florida shore, Nathan Caldwell whispered into the darkness of his rented room, maybe success made me blind. Maybe she left because I stopped seeing her as a person. He closed his eyes. Outside, the waves kept breathing, and somewhere in the distance, Coral Bay slept under a sky that promised storms and reckonings to come. 5 years earlier, the air inside Caldwell Tower carried a different kind of tension, not the one born of weather or fate, but of ambition. It was winter, and the sky outside the panoramic windows was the color of wet concrete. The city was shrinking beneath the heavy rain, and inside the conference room, so was everyone else, except her. Evelyn Moore stood at the far end of the long table, her hands clasped behind her back, a notebook pressed to her chest. Around her, a dozen executives shuffled nervously as Nathan Caldwell, then 53, paced like a general about to send soldiers into battle. We moved the launch date up by 4 weeks, he said flatly. If the competition breathes first, we lose the market. A silence followed. No one dared to disagree, no one except Evelyn. That's impossible, sir, she said, her voice steady but soft. The engineers are already working double shifts. Pushing them harder means risking a faulty product. Heads turned. A few colleagues shot her looks that begged her to stop talking. Nathan paused, his sharp gray eyes cutting toward her. You think I don't know what my people can handle, I think? She replied, taking a breath. You underestimate how much they've already given. The room went so quiet that even the rain against the glass sounded like applause. Nathan studied her, not with anger, but curiosity. She wasn't defiant. She was right. and she was brave enough to say it. He ended the meeting 5 minutes later, not with a reprimand, but with a rare smile that only she noticed. That was the beginning, the moment she became the only person in his world who didn't flinch when he raised his voice. For the next 3 years, she became more than an assistant. She became his anchor. She knew his schedule better than he did, finished his sentences in meetings, reminded him to eat when he forgot. She saw the man behind the titles, the one who stayed late, long after everyone else had gone home, staring at his reflection in the darkened window. Sometimes, when they worked late, he'd ask her opinion on things he didn't need to. Does this logo feel honest? Do you think I'm too hard on them? She'd always answer honestly, and he respected her for it. There were nights when the world outside vanished, only the soft hum of city lights and the steady rhythm of her typing. In those moments, something quiet lived between them. Not romance exactly, but recognition. Two people who saw too much of themselves in each other, lonely, capable, guarded. One night, near the end, she found him sitting in the dark, the glow of his computer, the only light in the room. It was nearly midnight, snow drifting past the window like ash. He looked tired, not from work, but from the weight of his own perfection. "You should go home, Mr. Caldwell," she said gently. He didn't look up. "Home," he repeated, as if it were a foreign word. "You mean the penthouse I paid too much for and never sleep in?" She smiled faintly. "Then, go anywhere else." He chuckled, a low sound that seemed to surprise even him. "And leave this kingdom unattended." "A kingdom doesn't mean much if the king never leaves the castle," she replied. He finally turned to look at her, really look, and for the first time, she saw something break through the surface of his composure. It wasn't desire, not exactly. It was longing. A kind of unspoken grief for everything he'd missed while building his empire. Their eyes met, and the room felt smaller. The air changed, grew slower. She could hear her own heartbeat echoing in the quiet. He rose from his chair and walked toward the window. The city's lights reflected in his eyes. "You know what they say about people like me," he murmured, "that we don't need anyone." She stood beside him, the snow outside blurring the skyline into watercolor. "Maybe you just stopped believing anyone could stay." He turned to her then, a fraction too close. The distance between them was measured in breaths. His hand twitched, almost as if he meant to touch her arm, then stopped halfway. "You should go home." "Evelyn," he said finally, his voice rougher than before. She hesitated. She could have said something, anything to break the spell or to fulfill it. Instead, she nodded. "Good night, Mr. Caldwell." "Good night, Evelyn." That was their rhythm, always one heartbeat away from something they never dared to name. In the weeks that followed, the air in the office changed. Rumors swirled not of romance, but of power. Colleagues began to resent her quiet influence. Every suggestion she made, every decision she mediated for him, drew whispers behind her back. Nathan noticed, though he pretended not to. He told himself he was protecting her by saying nothing. But silence can wound deeper than words. The breaking point came during another meeting, the one that would define both their lives. A deal went wrong. Millions at stake. An investor blamed her for the delay. She took the criticism without flinching. Nathan defended the project, but not her. He let the board scapegoat her to save face. That night, she packed her things. He found her in her office, coat draped over her chair, a resignation letter folded neatly on the desk. You're quitting, he asked. Yes. Because of them? Because of you? That word stopped him. She turned then, her expression calm but tired. You once told me this company was built on trust, but you only trust yourself. And I can't work for a man who doesn't see the people keeping his world standing. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Pride strangled the words he wanted to say. I'm sorry. Don't go. Please stay. All he managed was a cold, practiced tone. If that's your choice, I won't stop you. She gave a small, sad smile, the kind you offer before closing a chapter. That's exactly the problem. Nathan. You never stop anyone. You just watch them walk away. She left before the rain stopped, and he never asked her to stay. The airplane wheels hit the tarmac with a heavy thud, jolting Nathan awake from a dreamless half-sleep. Outside the window, sunlight glared against the wet runway. Florida's air was heavy with salt and humidity, so different from the sterile chill of Seattle. As he stepped out of the terminal, the warmth wrapped around him like something alive, soft, relentless, almost forgiving. The drive from Tampa to Coral Bay took just over an hour. He rented a modest black sedan, the kind of car no one would remember passing by. The highway ran straight for miles, lined with palm trees bending toward the wind. When he rolled down the window, the smell of the ocean reached him, a scent that somehow felt both foreign and familiar. He followed the GPS through sleepy roads that narrowed into a single lane, cutting through dunes and small wooden houses painted in faded blues and yellows. Signs pointed toward Coral Bay Pier, Langford's Cafe, Community Art Center. Everything looked handmade, sun-bleached, lived in. He could already sense that this place measured time not by minutes, but by tides. Nathan stopped in front of a small seaside inn, Harbor Haven Cabins. The sign hung slightly crooked, the paint peeling. But the porch was clean, and a lazy golden retriever slept under the shade. He parked the car, grabbed his leather bag, and stepped into the office. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 60s, silver hair tied back, wearing a floral blouse. Her name tag read M. Langford. She looked up and smiled, the way small-town people smile warmly, but with an instinct that reads strangers faster than they read themselves. You must be Mr. Caldwell, she said, as if she'd been expecting him. Nathan, he corrected automatically. Just Nathan. Well, just Nathan. You're in cabin 4? Ocean view. The AC rattles a little, but so do we all at this age. He chuckled, a real one, surprising himself. How long will you be staying? A few days. He lied. Nobody ever says a few days unless they're running from something, she said lightly, handing him the keys. He paused, unsure how to answer. She smiled wider, as if she already knew. The cabin was small, a single room with a worn couch, a wooden table, and a porch facing the sea. Through the open window came the sound of waves, the steady rhythm that made him feel both calm and exposed. He unpacked nothing except a white shirt, his laptop, and a photo frame he carried from his office, though he didn't know why. The frame was empty. The photo he'd meant to put in it had never been taken. That night, he didn't work. He didn't even open his computer. He simply sat outside on the porch, watching the sun melt into the water. The horizon burned gold, then purple, then black. The sound of the tide reminded him of her laughter, that low, effortless sound he hadn't heard since the day she left. The breeze tasted of salt and memory. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a man who had run out of reasons not to feel. The next morning, Nathan woke early. He hadn't slept much, but the light flooding the cabin was soft and inviting. He walked along the beach barefoot, suit pants rolled to his calves, shoes dangling from one hand. Seagulls cried overhead. Children's laughter drifted faintly from somewhere inland. When he passed a small cafe overlooking the shore, Langford's, the same name as the innkeeper, he stepped inside. The place was cozy, with mismatched mugs, framed photos of fishermen, and the smell of coffee strong enough to make him forget his insomnia. Mrs. Langford stood behind the counter again, apron tied loosely around her waist. "Well, look who the ocean dragged in," she said. "Breakfast specials, grits, eggs, and a promise you'll like it. I'll take your word for it." He sat by the window, watching locals filter in construction workers, retirees, mothers with sandy-haired toddlers. They greeted one another by name, their laughter slow and unguarded. One man noticed Nathan's crisp shirt and the leather strap of his expensive watch. "You visiting?" he asked. "Something like that," Nathan said. "Welcome to Coral Bay. Don't worry, we only judge tourists for the first 3 days." The table burst into laughter. Nathan smiled faintly, realizing how long it had been since he'd been part of anything ordinary. After breakfast, he strolled through town. Every corner seemed touched by color murals on shop walls, seashell mobiles swinging from porches, children's drawings taped to windows. When he passed a small white building with a painted sign reading Coral Bay Art Center, he slowed down. Through the open door came voices, bright, young, laughing. He peeked inside and saw a classroom filled with easels, paint-splattered floors, and sunlight spilling through high windows. A woman stood at the front, bending down to help a little girl hold her brush steady. He couldn't see her face, but he didn't need to. He recognized the posture, straight but gentle, the tilt of her head when she listened. His chest tightened. She was there. Evelyn. She wore a loose white blouse and faded jeans, her hair tied carelessly in a bun. A streak of yellow paint marked her forearm like a badge of freedom. The children around her were painting oceans wild, imperfect, full of joy. He stepped back before she could turn and see him. He stood outside for a long moment, staring at the hand-painted mural beside the door. Art belongs to everyone. It struck him as something she would have said not for applause, but because she believed it. Back at the cabin, he poured himself a drink, though it was barely noon. The ice cracked loudly in the glass, echoing his thoughts. What was he even doing here? He stared at the sea until it blurred, trying to own what he couldn't have, trying to fix what never broke except inside him. He'd come all this way for what? An apology, closure, or something uglier. The need to see if she had missed him at all. He imagined her laughter inside that bright classroom, her sleeves rolled up, surrounded by people who didn't need her to be perfect. He envied them. He envied the simplicity of it all, the kind that no amount of money could buy. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Langford stood outside with a small plate. "You skipped lunch," she said, holding out a slice of lemon pie. "I didn't order. You didn't have to. Around here, kindness is compulsory." She smiled and left before he could thank her. The pie tasted of sugar and salt air, the flavor of a world that kept going, no matter who left or who returned. He set the empty plate down and looked toward the distant art center. Evelyn Moore was somewhere out there, living a life that had nothing to do with him. And that, he realized, was both her strength and his punishment. The following morning came with a fog that rolled across Coral Bay like a slow secret. Nathan woke before dawn, restless, unable to stop thinking about the glimpse he'd caught of her the day before. The image of Evelyn standing among children and sunlight had lodged itself in his mind, soft, defiant, and painfully distant. He told himself he only wanted to see her once. To say hello, maybe I'm sorry, and then leave. But even that felt like a lie he had told himself too many times. Still, by mid-morning, he found his feet carrying him toward the art center again. The bell above the glass door chimed softly as he entered. The scent of acrylic paint and sea air filled the room. Inside, sunlight fell through large windows, illuminating a dozen small easels lined up in neat rows. Children bent over their canvases, tongues sticking out in concentration. The room was alive with chatter, the kind of noise that felt like warmth. At the far end of the room, Evelyn stood beside a boy in a wheelchair, helping him guide a paintbrush across the canvas. Her voice was gentle but firm. "You don't have to stay inside the lines. Mason," she said. "The sea never does." Nathan stopped in the doorway. He could have left right then, walked away, and kept the memory intact. But he stayed. Something in him needed to know who she'd become without him. When she finally turned and saw him, her expression faltered just for a second. Her eyes widened, then softened. "Nathan?" His name left her lips like an echo she hadn't expected to find again. He swallowed. "Hello? Evelyn?" For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The children continued to paint, oblivious to the silent current between the two adults. Finally, she nodded toward the hallway. "Let's talk outside." They stepped out into the courtyard, where sea grapes hung low over the fence and gulls called above. The air shimmered with heat. She folded her arms loosely, leaning against the wooden railing. He noticed the faint flecks of paint on her fingertips, yellow, green, blue, tiny rebellions against the polished world they'd once shared. "You look different," he said. She smiled lightly. "That tends to happen when you stop living under fluorescent lights." He almost laughed, but it came out as a sigh. "I didn't mean to just show up." "I saw your picture, I figured," she interrupted softly. "It's been going around." "It wasn't gossip I came for," he said quickly. Her brow lifted. "Then what?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. The words felt too small for the storm inside him. Instead, he looked around the painted benches, the chalk drawings on the pavement, the wildflowers climbing the fence. It was a world without sharp edges, a world she'd built for herself, far from his shadow. "This place suits you," he said finally. "It saved me," she replied simply. "These kids remind me that creation isn't about control. It's about letting go." He looked down, his hands tightening on the railing. "I was never good at that." "No," she said, not unkindly. "You weren't?" The honesty between them settled like fine dust, visible, quiet, impossible to ignore. A small girl ran out of the classroom, holding up a dripping painting. "Ms. Yoweri Moore, I made you a dolphin?" Evelyn crouched down, smiling. "It's beautiful." "Lily, I can almost hear it singing." The girl giggled and ran back inside. Nathan watched the exchange, a strange ache forming behind his ribs. He remembered boardrooms and contracts, deadlines and precision, and here she was, barefoot on the grass, covered in children's paint, talking about dolphins that sang. He had once thought power was what defined a person, but now, looking at her, he realized freedom did. She turned back to him. Are you still in Seattle for now? But it doesn't feel like I'm really there anymore. That's because you never were. Nathan, she said gently, even when you stood in front of the window, you were somewhere else. He stared at her, caught off guard by how well she still read him. She'd always seen the man behind the armor even when he wished she hadn't. You should come to the festival tomorrow, she said suddenly, breaking the silence. We're hosting an auction to raise funds for new equipment. I don't want to cause a scene. It's Coral Bay, she said with a small laugh. The biggest scene here is when Mrs. Langford runs out of pie. He smiled, and for a brief second, the years between them disappeared. All right, he said quietly. I'll come. As he turned to leave, she called out, Nathan. He stopped, glancing back. Why now, she asked. After all this time, he hesitated, then said the only truth he could manage. Because I never stopped thinking about the day you walked away. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, softly, you didn't stop me. He nodded, unable to speak, and left before the weight of her words crushed what little composure he had left. Back at his cabin, the sun had dipped low, painting the water in shades of rose and silver. Nathan poured a drink, though the taste of bourbon was dull against the ache in his chest. He tried to tell himself that seeing her had brought closure, that he could leave now, knowing she was safe, happy, whole. But the truth lay heavy and bitter. She had changed utterly. The woman who once carried the world's expectations on her shoulders now seemed light as the sea breeze. She moved with ease, spoke with warmth, lived without fear of judgment. And he, standing on his porch, realized he was still the same man who measured life in contracts and meetings, always reaching, never resting. The realization hit like a quiet confession. She didn't need him anymore. And that, somehow, hurt the most. The morning of the Art Center's fundraiser arrived with a sky washed clean by rain. The streets of Coral Bay shimmered, and the air smelled of wet sand and new beginnings. Nathan stood outside the Art Center, sleeves rolled up, a paint roller in hand, something he hadn't held since college. He'd promised Evelyn he'd help prepare for the exhibit. He wasn't sure if she'd believed him when he offered. But she had smiled that quiet smile of hers and said, All right, Mr. Caldwell. Just don't wear anything you care about. Now. His once white shirt was streaked with pale yellow and ocean blue. A little boy had accidentally flicked a brush in his direction earlier. And Evelyn had laughed harder than he'd ever heard her laugh in years. It had startled him how easily her joy filled the room, how naturally people gravitated toward her. He wasn't used to belonging anywhere. And yet, here, under the sound of children's chatter and the smell of paint, he didn't feel like an outsider. He just felt present. Evelyn stood beside him, painting a section near the window. Strands of hair had fallen loose from her bun, curling in the humidity. She brushed them back with her wrist, leaving a streak of turquoise on her cheek. You missed a spot, she teased. No, that's modern art, he said dryly, stepping closer. Ah, so chaos with intention. Exactly. Their eyes met briefly. The laughter that followed wasn't forced. It flowed, easy and light. When a group of volunteers began hanging canvases, Evelyn handed Nathan a hammer. Careful, she said. These walls are old. I built skyscrapers. Evelyn, I think I can handle a nail. He tapped the first one too hard. The nail bent sideways, the sound sharp and awkward. She raised an eyebrow. You were saying he stared at the crooked nail, then at her grin, and laughed. A real laugh, unguarded, almost youthful. She laughed too, the sound mingling with the music playing faintly from someone's phone. In that tiny, ordinary moment, something inside him shifted. For the first time in years, he felt human again. By afternoon, the Arts Center looked alive. Bright banners fluttered at the entrance, and the scent of lemonade mixed with the ocean air. Children ran around carrying paintbrushes and balloons. Nathan stood by a table of framed paintings, double-checking the donation list. Evelyn joined him, holding a clipboard smudged with fingerprints and color. "You really didn't have to do all this," she said. "You said you needed help," he replied simply. "Yes, but I didn't expect the former king of technology to turn into my logistics assistant. Retired kings need hobbies." She smiled. "So this is a hobby now. Helping you feels less like a hobby and more like a reminder," he said. "Of what? That there's a world outside deadlines." Her gaze softened. "I'm glad you found it." Later, when the volunteers took a break, Evelyn brought him a cup of iced coffee sweet with too much cream. He frowned at the taste, but didn't complain. She noticed. Still drinking it, black old habits die hard. Some habits need to. They sat on the porch steps, side by side. The breeze carried the scent of seagrass, and somewhere down the street, Miss Langford's radio hummed an old country tune. "You know," Evelyn said when I first came here, "I couldn't paint a thing. My hands would shake every time I tried. Why? Because I thought everything I made had to be perfect. Took me months to realize perfection is just fear in disguise." Nathan nodded slowly. Fear of what? Of being seen as we really are. He stared at the distant horizon. That's a fear I know too well. They fell into a quiet rhythm. No boardrooms, no noise, just the sound of the waves and two people remembering what peace felt like. As the day wore on, Nathan helped hang a final banner across the entrance. When he stepped back to admire their work, Evelyn stood beside him, wiping her hands on a rag. A smear of crimson paint streaked across her forearm. Without thinking, he reached out and brushed it gently away with his thumb. The gesture was small, but the air between them shifted again, charged, fragile. She didn't move, didn't look away. For a moment, it felt like they might finally speak the words left hanging for years. But before either could, Caleb, her young colleague, appeared, waving a clipboard. "Evelyn, we're out of brushes." She blinked, stepping back as if waking from a dream. "I'll get them," she said quickly, and disappeared inside. Nathan stood alone for a moment, staring at his hand, the faint trace of red paint still warm on his skin. By evening, lanterns hung along the porch, glowing softly. The sky turned amber, and the children's laughter gave way to quiet conversation. Nathan stayed to stack chairs, refusing to leave when Evelyn told him to rest. When the last guest left, she locked the doors and turned to him. "Thank you," she said. "Really?" "You're welcome," he replied. "You made something beautiful here?" "We did," she corrected gently. He looked around the glowing lights, the walls alive with color, the scent of fresh paint and lemon pie still lingering in the air. Something about it all felt more alive than anything he'd built in 30 years of business. "You've changed, Evelyn," he said quietly. "I had to. For the better," he added. She smiled, a touch of sadness behind it. "Change isn't always better, Nathan." Sometimes it's just necessary. They stood in silence, listening to the waves in the distance. The wind tugged gently at her hair. He wanted to say something. Don't drift away again. Not this time. But instead, he only nodded. I'll see you tomorrow, she said, turning toward the streetlight. Tomorrow, he echoed, back at his cabin. He washed the paint from his hands, though a faint blue stain clung to his skin. He sat by the open window, listening to the tide roll in and out, steady as a heartbeat. He thought about how she laughed when the boy flung paint at him, how her eyes glimmered when she spoke about the children's art, how her presence made everything else, the boardrooms, the noise, the loneliness, fade into something small and unimportant. He didn't know where this fragile connection was heading, friendship, redemption, or something in between. But he knew one thing for certain. For the first time in years, he felt human again. By late afternoon, the sky above Coral Bay began to change. The horizon, once soft and blue, darkened to a bruised gray. A storm was forming far out at sea, and the air carried that heavy stillness that always came before thunder. Nathan stood under the awning of the art center, watching the clouds crawl toward shore. Inside, he could hear the faint hum of laughter, Evelyn's voice, bright and light, mingling with another. He turned slightly. Through the open door, he saw her standing beside Caleb Rivers, the young art instructor who joined the center last year. Caleb was maybe 30, lean and sunburned, with the kind of careless ease that only belonged to people who had never carried the weight of power. He was holding a stack of paintbrushes and saying something animated. Evelyn laughed, tilting her head the way she did when she was truly listening. Nathan's chest tightened. It was ridiculous, childish. Even but the sound of her laughter in someone else's company clawed at something raw inside him. He turned away before either of them noticed. He walked along the beach, shoes in hand, the wind growing sharper with every step. The sea had begun to churn, waves swelling higher, spitting foam onto the sand. His thoughts tangled with the rhythm of the water. What was he even doing here, pretending to help with an art exhibit, hoping for forgiveness that no one owed him? He remembered how Evelyn had smiled at Caleb, open, easy, unburdened. That was new. She had never smiled like that in Seattle. Back then, every smile she gave him had been measured, careful, filtered through professionalism. But now, she was free, and that freedom felt like a door that had closed quietly, locking him outside. A gust of wind whipped his shirt against his chest. He stopped, staring out at the line where sea met sky. The storm clouds moved closer, curling like fists. Why does this hurt so much? It wasn't just jealousy. It was the realization that she had built a life that didn't need him in it. And maybe that was what love was supposed to look like. But Nathan had never learned to love without control. He kicked at the sand, angry at himself for feeling something so useless. He had no right to be jealous. He had no claim, no promises, no future here. And yet, the ache refused to leave. The first drops of rain began to fall as he ducked into Langford's cafe. Mrs. Langford was closing up early because of the storm, but she looked up and smiled when she saw him dripping near the door. "Looks like the sky's got a temper tonight," she said, handing him a towel. "Seems like it's catching," he muttered. She raised an eyebrow. "You look like a man thinking himself into a corner." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I am. Want some coffee? Please?" As she poured, he stared out the window. Lightning flashed far off over the water. For a moment, the reflection of his face merged with the storm a man built from glass and regret. "You ever notice," he said quietly, "how some people seem to find peace right after they stop needing you, Mrs. Langford gave a small hum. "That's not peace, dear. That's growth." He glanced at her, surprised by the sharp kindness in her tone. "You can't compete with someone's healing," she continued. "You can only pray you weren't the wound." The words struck him deeper than he expected. He nodded, not trusting himself to answer. When he stepped back outside, rain poured in sheets. The street shimmered under the lamplight. He walked without direction until he found himself near the art center again. Through the glowing windows, he saw Evelyn and Caleb moving tables, laughing as they worked to save the canvases from getting soaked. Caleb reached up to grab a tarp. Evelyn steadied the ladder for him, her hand briefly brushing his. Nathan froze where he stood. The rational part of him knew it was nothing simple teamwork, nothing more. But emotion wasn't rational. It was primal, sharp, jealous. He turned away, his pulse quickening with something he hated admitting even to himself. The thunder cracked above him, and he felt the sting of rain on his skin, heavy, relentless. He walked back to his cabin, soaked, his shoes squelching against the wooden porch as he entered. He didn't turn on the light. The room filled only with the flicker of lightning through the window. He poured himself a drink and sat on the edge of the bed, the glass trembling in his hand. His reflection stared back from the dark window, older, wearier, and smaller than he remembered. What was it really, he thought? Love or guilt dressed as affection? He closed his eyes. The years of silence between them replayed like waves. The day she quit. The letter she left on his desk. The look in her eyes that said, "You've lost something you didn't even know you wanted." Maybe this was punishment, watching her become everything he had kept her from being. Maybe what he called love was only the desperate need to rewrite the past in his favor. Was it love, he whispered into the storm? Or was it just guilt, dressed as affection? The lightning answered with a flash that illuminated the empty room. He set the glass down and leaned forward, hands clasped, breathing hard. There was a sudden knock, 3 quick taps. He froze. When he opened the door, Evelyn stood there, her hair damp, raincoat clinging to her shoulders. Behind her, the wind howled, tossing the palms sideways. "You're out in this," he said, startled. "We had to move the paintings. Caleb's finishing up. I saw your light. I didn't turn one on. You never did like being seen," she said softly. She stepped inside before he could argue. Water dripped onto the wooden floor as thunder rumbled close. "You'll catch cold," he murmured, grabbing a towel. "You worry too much," she said, but took it anyway. For a moment, they stood there, 2 silhouettes framed by lightning, their silence louder than the storm. "You looked angry when you left earlier," she said. "Did I do something?" "No," he said quickly. Then, quieter, "I did. Nathan, I don't know what I'm doing here." "Evelyn?" His voice cracked, honest and raw. "I thought maybe I came to apologize, or to see if you were happy. But I think I came because I can't stand that you don't need me anymore." Her expression softened. "You don't have to be needed to be forgiven." He looked away, blinking against the sting behind his eyes. "I don't know how to be anything else," he said. She touched his arm lightly, grounding him in the noise of the storm. "Then learn," she whispered. The rain pounded harder, wind rattling the shutters. For a long moment, they stood together in silence, the storm raging outside while something gentler took root between them, fragile, unspoken. When the thunder finally began to fade, she smiled faintly. "We should check the art center in the morning," she said. "I'll be there," he replied. She nodded, then slipped out into the rain. The door closed softly behind her. Nathan stood alone again, the sound of the storm now distant. He looked down at his hands, still trembling, still unsure. Outside, the wind carried the last echo of her voice. Inside, he whispered to himself. Maybe this storm wasn't meant to break anything. Maybe it was meant to wash something clean. The storm hit Coral Bay harder than anyone expected. By evening, the wind howled through the narrow streets like something alive, tearing branches from trees and hurling sand against glass. The ocean was a furious, rising wall. Thunder cracked across the horizon like an ancient heartbeat. Nathan stood at the window of his cabin, watching the storm surge closer to shore. His phone buzzed on the table, an alert from the town's emergency system. Flash flood warning. Seek shelter. He set it down. But then another message came through, this time from Evelyn. At the art center, trying to save the paintings before the roof leaks. Could use a hand? Without thinking, he grabbed his raincoat and keys and stepped into the tempest. The streets were rivers. Wind drove sheets of water sideways, and every gust felt like it could rip the world open. Nathan's car skidded twice before he abandoned it and ran the last 2 blocks on foot. By the time he reached the art center, he was soaked to the bone. Inside, Evelyn was moving canvases from the walls to the tables, her clothes clinging, hair plastered to her forehead. Water dripped from a crack in the ceiling. She looked up when he burst through the door. "Nathan?" she shouted over the roar of wind. "What are you doing here? You texted me," he said breathlessly, pushing the door shut against the gale. "I didn't think you'd actually come. You should know by now I'm terrible at staying away." For a second, she laughed, a quick, disbelieving sound before they both turned to the task at hand. Together, they moved the paintings to the corner farthest from the leaking roof. Nathan held the ladder while she stapled a plastic sheet to the rafters. The storm pounded harder, shaking the old building. Rain found its way in through every crack. The lights flickered once, then went out completely, plunging them into darkness. Evelyn climbed down, breathing hard. Generators probably flooded. "Then we wait," he said, his voice softer now. "It's safer here than outside." She nodded, wiping her face with her sleeve. The only light came from lightning flashes through the windows, brief white bursts that turned everything into fragments. For a long time, neither spoke. The storm outside was deafening, but inside, the silence between them was louder still. Finally, Nathan broke it. "You shouldn't be here alone." I wasn't alone." "You came," she said simply. That landed somewhere deep in him. He sat down on a crate, elbows on his knees, watching her as she checked each canvas. The air smelled of salt and paint. She moved with quiet determination, every motion precise, patient, as if she'd been training all her life for chaos. "You never change," he said quietly. "That's not true," she replied, not looking up. "I just stopped trying to change myself to fit someone else's world." Lightning flashed again, illuminating her face, strong, calm, unafraid. He realized that even the storm bowed around her, as though she belonged in it. "Evelyn," he said, voice rough, "I need to ask you something." She looked over, eyes steady. "What that day you left? Was it because of me, or because of the job, she exhaled slowly, setting down the last painting. Both, she said. But mostly you? He swallowed hard. I figured, you built walls so high, Nathan, no one could reach you. Not even the people who cared. I thought I was protecting everyone. You were protecting yourself, she said softly. He stood then, pacing in the narrow space. The wind howled louder, rattling the window panes. You left because I made you invisible, he said suddenly. Didn't I? Her eyes glistened in the lightning. No, Nathan, she whispered. I left because you made yourself unreachable. The words hit like thunder. For a heartbeat, the storm outside seemed to pause, as if even nature wanted him to hear it. He turned away, pressing a hand against the wall to steady himself. Water dripped somewhere in the corner, a slow rhythm marking the seconds between what had been and what would never be again. He turned back to her, voice trembling. I thought if I worked hard enough, built enough, earned enough, maybe I'd be worth something. Maybe people would stay. You already were worth something, she said. You just couldn't see it. You did, he said quietly. You saw me when no one else did. And I pushed you away because I didn't know how to be seen without losing control. Evelyn stepped closer. Rain poured down the windows like tears. The sound of thunder rolled above them, deep and endless. You didn't lose control, she said. You lost yourself. He let out a breath that sounded almost like a sob. I'm so sorry. You don't have to apologize for who you were, she said gently. Just don't stay that man. Their eyes met two storms colliding, neither willing to destroy the other. He whispered, almost to himself, I don't even know how to start over. Then don't start over, she said. Start honest. The power flickered back on for a moment, casting a pale glow across the room. The rain began to soften, though thunder still growled in the distance. Nathan looked at her hair damp, clothes wrinkled, but eyes steady as light. Without thinking, he stepped forward. She didn't move. He reached out, hesitating, and then she was in his arms. No words, no pretense, just the quiet press of forgiveness between them. He felt her tremble once, then relax against him. His chin rested on her hair, and he could smell the faint salt of the sea mixed with paint. He closed his eyes. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The closeness was enough, two people holding everything they'd never said, everything they'd broken and rebuilt in silence. Outside, the storm began to drift away, leaving only the steady hum of rain on the roof. Inside, they stood motionless, two silhouettes wrapped in the soft echo of understanding. When morning came, the sky over Coral Bay was pale and washed clean. The streets glistened with puddles, and gulls returned to the shoreline as if nothing had happened. Nathan and Evelyn stepped outside the art center together. The air smelled of renewal. She looked at him, her expression unreadable, and said, You should get some sleep. He nodded, So should you. But as she walked away, he realized something fundamental had shifted not just in her eyes, but in his chest. The storm hadn't just passed. It had undone him piece by piece, and somehow, that felt like the only way forward. The calm after the storm didn't last long. For 2 days, Coral Bay basked under clear skies. The streets dried, the gulls returned, and the town slipped back into its lazy rhythm. But peace has a cruel way of warning you before it breaks a whisper before the noise. On the third morning, Nathan's phone wouldn't stop ringing. He ignored the first few calls. Then the text messages began, dozens of them, blinking like alarms. Call me now. Turn on the news. What the hell happened? When he finally opened one, his breath caught. The headline glared back in bold letters: Billionaire Nathan Caldwell, spotted in Florida, with former assistant secret affair exposed below. It was a grainy photo: Nathan and Evelyn, standing in front of the art center, covered in paint, laughing. The caption twisted the scene into something sordid. Sources suggest Caldwell's trip to Florida was more than a vacation. Insiders recall rumors of past closeness between the CEO and his former aide, who resigned under unclear circumstances. He stared at the screen, his stomach turning cold. The image that had once been innocent joy, sunlight, connection, was now weaponized. He didn't need to guess who had leaked it. He knew. Marcus Hale, the man who had once toasted his every success, the same man waiting for a moment like this. By noon, the story had spread across every financial news site. Investors demanded explanations. Stock prices trembled. The press camped outside Caldwell Tower, their microphones like loaded guns. Nathan's interim assistant managed to reach him through a flood of calls. The board's furious. Sir, they're meeting tonight without you. Let them, Nathan said flatly. Sir, they're talking about a forced resignation. Then it'll save me the trouble of writing one. He hung up, staring at the ocean beyond his porch. It glittered mockingly under the Florida sun, indifferent to his unraveling. He'd spent decades mastering the art of controlling markets, decisions, people. But this was chaos of the heart, and no press statement could fix it. Meanwhile, at the art center, the whispers had begun. When Evelyn arrived that morning, parents stood in small clusters outside. Some greeted her stiffly, others looked away. She heard fragments of conversations: inappropriate, the billionaire, old scandal. By midday, a journalist was waiting near the gate. Ms. Moore, care to comment on your relationship with Mr. Caldwell? Her hands trembled as she unlocked the door. There's nothing to comment on, she said, keeping her voice steady. But the damage was done. A few parents pulled their children from class that afternoon. Emails arrived from the community board expressing concerns about the school's reputation. By sunset, the weight of it all pressed down like the storm that had just passed. She sat alone in the empty classroom, staring at the half-finished paintings, bright colors now dulled by silence. When Nathan appeared in the doorway, she didn't look up. You saw it, she said. Yes. Then you know what it's doing to me. He stepped closer. I'll fix it. She laughed bitterly. How, with a press release? With your lawyers, if I have to? That's the problem. Nathan, you still think everything can be fixed like a business deal. He stopped, her words slicing through him. You didn't ask for this, he said quietly. And it's my fault you're in the middle of it. It doesn't matter whose fault it is, she said. It just hurts. That night, Nathan joined the emergency board meeting via video call. The faces staring back at him were cold, cautious, predatory. Marcus Hale, sitting at the center, spoke first. Nathan, this scandal is compromising the company's reputation. We've worked too hard to let personal issues drag us down. Personal issues? Nathan repeated. You mean my life? Perception is reality, Marcus said smoothly. And the perception is ugly. The others murmured their agreement. We think the best course, Marcus continued, is for you to step down at least temporarily. You mean permanently, Nathan said. No one corrected him. He felt the old anger rise, the instinct to fight, to destroy anyone who stood in his way, but something inside him had shifted. He was tired of wars that left nothing standing. Fine, he said at last. If this is what it takes to protect the company, I'll resign. Marcus leaned back, a smile flickering. That's wise. Nathan ended the call before he said something he couldn't take back. Later that night, he drove to Evelyn's house. The storm had left the roads littered with leaves and debris, but the air was calm now. Too calm, the kind of quiet that followed destruction. When she opened the door, he looked exhausted, not from travel, but from surrender. I resigned, he said simply. What they wanted, my head on a platter, so I handed it to them. She stared at him, eyes wide. You didn't have to? Yes. I did. You were right. I spent my whole life controlling things. Maybe it's time to lose something. Evelyn shook her head, tears forming. Nathan, that's not what I wanted. It doesn't matter. It's done. He stepped past her, looking around her small living room. The books, the scattered sketches, the smell of paint and tea. It was the opposite of everything he'd known imperfect, warm, alive. I used to think power meant never having to say sorry, he said. Now I'm realizing it just meant never having to feel. Evelyn's voice trembled. You didn't have to give up everything for me? He met her eyes, and for the first time, there was no defense left in his. I didn't do it for you. I did it because I couldn't stand watching you lose the peace you built because of me. She looked away, unable to stop her tears. They'll move on, he said softly. The world always does. And you? She asked. He hesitated, his voice barely audible. I'll find something else. Or maybe I won't. But at least I'll know I didn't drag you down with me. He turned to leave, his hand on the doorknob. The night outside was silver with moonlight, the air thick with things unsaid. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice breaking. Nathan, you don't always have to walk away first. He looked back, eyes tired but soft. If I stay, I'll ruin what's left of your peace. And if you leave, then at least one of us will still have it. They stood there, suspended between past and present, neither able to move. Finally, he reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek. I could survive losing the company, he whispered. But losing you again, I couldn't. Then he turned and stepped into the night, leaving behind the only thing that had ever truly mattered. The morning after Nathan's resignation, Seattle woke to a new headline, Caldwell steps down amid scandal, CFO to assume interim control. The photo beneath the headline showed Marcus Hale, standing at a podium with that polished half-smile he'd perfected over 2 decades of boardrooms and banquets. His voice carried calm authority, the kind that soothed investors but poisoned trust. We at Caldwell Systems remain committed to transparency and excellence, Marcus told reporters. Mr. Caldwell's decision to step aside allows us to move forward without distraction. The cameras flashed, capturing his confident posture. No one noticed the glint of triumph behind his polite sorrow. For most of the world, Marcus looked like a loyal executive reluctantly stepping up in a time of crisis. For Nathan, watching from his small cabin in Coral Bay, the sight burned like betrayal made flesh. 20 years ago, Nathan and Marcus had built the company together. They'd met in their 30s, 2 ambitious men who believed intellect could bend reality to will. Nathan was the visionary, Marcus, the strategist. Nathan dreamed in systems. Marcus executed them. They had been more than colleagues. They'd shared holidays, celebrated milestones, weathered failures. Marcus had stood beside Nathan through divorces, product crashes, and board wars. And yet, as Nathan watched the televised press conference, something cold settled in his chest, a clarity that only betrayal can bring. He always wanted my seat, Nathan thought, and now he has it. Later that day, a journalist emailed Evelyn a copy of what looked like an internal memo, a series of emails allegedly exchanged between her and Nathan, filled with flirtatious undertones and veiled references to private meetings. Her hands shook as she scrolled through them. Every sentence felt like an insult painted with her name. The tone wasn't hers. The words too ornate, too rehearsed, but they were convincing enough to look real. By evening, the emails were everywhere, leaked to blogs, discussed on talk shows, dissected by strangers online. Evelyn's phone buzzed relentlessly, so disappointed. Never thought you'd be that kind of woman. Gold digger. Each message was a blade. At first, she tried to call Nathan, but every time, the words died on her tongue. What would she even say? They think we were having an affair. The thought itself made her nauseous. When the local art center board called an emergency meeting, she didn't argue. She just sat there, listening as they discussed temporary leave until the situation clears. By the time she walked home, the sun had set, and the streets of Coral Bay felt colder than the night she'd first arrived. That same night, Nathan received an encrypted message from a former security engineer at Caldwell Systems, a woman named Priya, one of the few still loyal to him. Mr. Caldwell, her message read, "The emails circulating are fake. They were created from archived data on the company's server. I found access logs, Marcus's credentials." Nathan's pulse hammered. "Are you sure 100%? He used your old executive authorization key. He's framing you both." Nathan sat frozen for a moment, then rose abruptly, knocking over his chair. The air in the cabin felt too tight, too small. Betrayal was one thing, but to drag Evelyn into it, to soil her integrity, that was unforgivable. He called her immediately. She didn't answer. The call went to voicemail. Her voice was steady but distant. "This is Evelyn. Leave a message." He hung up without speaking. He couldn't bear to leave another apology on her phone. By morning, Nathan was on a plane back to Seattle. He hadn't planned it, hadn't even packed properly, but anger made decisions faster than reason. The city greeted him with gray skies and drizzle. It felt familiar, sterile, and suffocating. He went straight to Caldwell Tower, ignoring the startled looks from staff who thought he was gone for good. When he entered the top-floor boardroom, Marcus was there, sipping coffee, reviewing a stack of papers. He looked up, feigning surprise. "Nathan, I didn't expect you back so soon." "I'm sure you didn't," Nathan said quietly. "You shouldn't be here," Marcus said smoothly. "It's not your company anymore. It's not your lie to live with either. But here we are." Marcus set the cup down, the smile never leaving his face. "You're angry, I get it, but business moves on, Nathan. The world forgets quickly. So should you. You forged emails." "Marcus," Nathan said, "you dragged an innocent woman through hell just to sit in my chair?" Marcus tilted his head. "You can't prove that." "I can," Nathan said, sliding a USB drive across the table. "Access logs, timestamps, every digital footprint you left behind? For the first time, Marcus's expression faltered. You think anyone will believe you, he asked, after the press you've had? After the scandal, maybe not, Nathan said. But she will, and that's enough. He turned to leave. Marcus called after him, voice colder now. You always thought you were better than the rest of us, but you're just like me, desperate to matter. Nathan paused at the doorway. No, Marcus. I used to be you. That's why you scare me. Then he walked out. Back in Coral Bay, Evelyn sat on the porch of her small house, laptop open, watching her reputation unravel in real time. The messages had turned crueler, strangers dissecting her life, her body, her choices. Every refresh of the screen felt like a new wound. When Nathan's call came through, she almost didn't answer. But something in her broke at the sound of his voice. Evelyn, listen to me, he said, breathless. It's Marcus. He did this. He faked the emails. Nathan, I have proof. I'm coming back. Why? Her voice cracked. What difference does it make now? Because it's not about the company anymore, he said. It's about your name. You don't deserve to be dragged through this. There was a long silence. She whispered, And you think clearing my name will clear your conscience? He didn't answer. The line went quiet, filled only by the faint hum of distance. Later that night, Nathan sat in his car outside the old corporate building, watching Marcus leave through the private elevator. He realized something bitter and undeniable. Marcus hadn't just wanted power. He'd wanted Nathan's life, the envy, the loyalty, the legacy, all of it. And now he had it. But Nathan finally understood what Marcus never would. You can steal a man's title, but not his peace. He looked down at the USB drive in his hand, the small piece of truth that could bring everything crashing down. He closed his fingers around it and whispered, almost to himself, you took my company, but you won't take her dignity. The days that followed were quieter, but the kind of quiet that hums with intent, the stillness before someone makes a move. Coral Bay had already turned the page on the scandal. Small towns are like that. But Evelyn hadn't. She couldn't. The headlines might fade, the rumors might cool, but her name, the one thing she'd built with patience and integrity, was still covered in someone else's fingerprints. So she decided to clean it herself. It began with a visit from Julia Bennett, a journalist from the Coral Bay Chronicle, a small-town paper known for reporting on fishing contests and town fairs, not corporate scandals. Julia was in her late 30s, sharp-eyed and plain-spoken. I read your interview refusal, Julia said, leaning across Evelyn's small kitchen table. Most people who are guilty can't stop talking. You went silent. That's usually what innocence looks like. Evelyn studied her for a moment, cautious but intrigued. If you're here for gossip, I can't help you. I'm here for facts, Julia replied. And if I find them, maybe they'll help us both. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but whatever we find, it has to be real. I don't want revenge. I just want the truth. Julia smiled. Truth's the only story that sticks. That night, Evelyn sat at her desk long after midnight. The glow of her laptop illuminated her tired eyes. Years ago, she'd been Nathan's executive assistant, not just for scheduling and travel, but for operations. She'd learned more about the company's infrastructure than anyone realized. And Caldwell systems had always kept backups. She remembered how Nathan used to say, "Every system leaves a shadow." Evelyn. even when you think it's gone. She found her old credentials, long expired, but knew the backdoor routes, legacy admin panels, cached server maps. Using those fragments, she built her way in piece by digital piece. Her hand shook slightly. The cursor blinked against a sea of encrypted files. She whispered under her breath, "You underestimated me, Marcus." For hours, she dug navigating timestamps, metadata trails, cross-referencing email headers. She wasn't a hacker, but she was patient, and patience is its own weapon. Finally, she found an access log from 2 weeks before the story broke. User mhale corp, timestamp 203AI-M, file accessed email archive 2018, Moore E. drafts. He hadn't just forged new messages, he had stolen her archived drafts, reworded them, and rebuilt entire conversations to look real. The proof was right there in the data trail. But she needed more, something that would hold in the court of public opinion. Not just her conscience. Julia met her again the next morning at the cafe. Evelyn slid the printed logs across the table. Julia's eyes widened as she scanned the pages. "This is gold," she said. "You've got access timestamps, internal IPs, but if we go public too soon, he'll bury us under lawyers." "So what do we do?" Evelyn asked. "We go quiet," Julia said. "We let him think he's safe, and we trace the next step. People like Marcus never cover just one track. There'll be more payments, emails to journalists, maybe even a leak to the board." Evelyn nodded slowly. For the first time in weeks, she felt the smallest flicker of control. While she worked in silence, Nathan remained suspended from any formal position at the company. The interim CEO, Marcus, of course, had sent out an internal statement describing Nathan's temporary leave to focus on personal matters. In truth, Nathan was being watched. His accounts were frozen. His company access revoked. He was effectively cut off from everything he'd built. But when Evelyn called him late one night, his voice didn't sound defeated. "I heard what they did," she said. "Marcus, all of them, they're pretending you never existed." "Let them," he replied softly. "I have something better." "What, faith?" She didn't answer at first. "Faith in what in you?" he said simply. The line went quiet after that. But in that silence, Evelyn found her reason to keep digging. With Julia's help, Evelyn traced an unexpected path, a series of payments authorized under a project code called Corporate Media Partnerships. At first glance, it looked like standard PR expenses, but Julia noticed something off. "These vendor IDs don't match any of Caldwell's usual agencies," she said. "Look, 3 payments, all routed to shell companies in Delaware." Evelyn frowned. "You think he paid someone to plant the story?" "I don't think," Julia said, scribbling notes. "I know. Over the next few days, they pieced it together. Marcus had hired an external contractor to manage the narrative. That contractor owned a media firm that had conveniently leaked the first article about Nathan's affair. It was a full-circle deception, hidden behind the language of corporate communications. Evelyn stared at the evidence spread across her table account statements, metadata logs, financial transfers. Her voice was calm when she said, "He thought I'd stay quiet. He thought I'd be too ashamed to fight." Julia nodded. "He doesn't know you, does he?" Evelyn smiled faintly, though her eyes burned with determination. "He knew the woman who followed orders, not the one who left." That night, she sat by the window, listening to the waves crash beyond her porch. The sea was calm again, glittering under the moonlight, but her thoughts were sharp, alive. She opened her laptop and began writing. Not a legal statement, a story, A detailed, factual account of what had happened, the fake emails, the server logs, the proof of manipulation. She attached screenshots, files, metadata stamps, everything that spoke louder than words. She sent it to Julia with one line in the email: publish when ready. Truth doesn't need permission. Then she closed the laptop and exhaled long and heavy, like someone finally letting go of the version of herself the world had painted. When Nathan read the Coral Bay Chronicle the next morning, his hands trembled. Inside the scandal, how greed and deception destroyed Caldwell systems. The byline read by Julia Bennett, with contributions from Evelyn Moore. The article was meticulous. It exposed the forged emails, the money trail, and the timeline of Marcus's sabotage. Every claim was supported by evidence. Within hours, larger outlets picked it up. Investors demanded an inquiry. The company's board called an emergency meeting, this time without Marcus. Nathan called Evelyn immediately. "You did this," he said, voice thick with pride. "We did," she corrected. "I just used the same tools that once kept me invisible." He smiled to himself, staring at the sunrise over the water. She had been underestimated her whole life. This time, she had used it as a weapon. The boardroom of Caldwell Tower had never been so silent. Floor-to-ceiling glass reflected the skyline of Seattle, the morning sun cutting through the clouds like a blade. The air was tense, the kind of tension that hums beneath power suits and polite voices. Every member of the board was seated, 12 faces that once followed Nathan's every word, now watching him like a relic of another era. At the head of the table sat Marcus Hale, calm, polished, pretending the ground beneath him wasn't about to give way. The meeting had been called to clarify outstanding allegations. What the board didn't know was that it was about to become an execution. Nathan sat near the window, hands folded. He looked older than the man in their glossy press photos, not weaker, but stripped of the armor that once made him untouchable. Marcus spoke first, his tone rehearsed. "Thank you, everyone, for joining on such short notice. I think we can all agree it's time to put this unfortunate matter behind us. Caldwell Systems must move forward, unified and strong." Nathan smiled faintly. "Yes, Marcus. I couldn't agree more. The truth does have a way of moving things forward." Marcus paused just long enough for the first crack to appear, before anyone could respond. The glass doors opened. Evelyn Moore stepped into the boardroom. Every head turned. The murmurs began immediately. Reporters had swarmed her. Tabloids had smeared her. And now here she was, calm and unbroken. She wore no power suit, no armor, just quiet certainty. Marcus's expression tightened. "Ms. Moore, this is a private no." Nathan interrupted. "This is a reckoning." Evelyn placed a small laptop on the conference table. She looked directly at Marcus. "You've spent the last month telling stories about me, about us. It's time the board saw the real one." She tapped a key. The screen lit up, projecting on the wall server logs, timestamps, email chains, payment records, a trail of deceit too clean to be accidental. "These are internal server records," she said steadily, "accessed from Marcus Hale's credentials at 2:03 a.m. He entered the corporate archive, altered several of my emails, and re-uploaded them to the system to fabricate a relationship between me and Mr. Caldwell." Gasps rippled across the room. Marcus forced a laugh. "This is absurd. Anyone could have—" "You're right," Evelyn cut in. "If it weren't for this—" She pulled another document from her folder, a bank transfer log, 3 payments made to a Delaware media company. The same company that leaked the first story about the so-called affair. All authorized under your signature. Marcus. Marcus's face drained of color. You can't prove that signature is mine. Evelyn met his gaze. It's your handwriting? Marcus, I should know. I used to schedule your meetings. The silence that followed was brutal. Then, one of the board members, an older woman named Dr. Patel, spoke quietly. Is this true? Marcus opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Sweat beaded on his forehead. You think this will save you, Nathan? He hissed suddenly, turning toward his former friend. You think they'll forgive you because of her? Nathan stood slowly, his voice calm but cutting through the air like thunder. I don't need forgiveness. Marcus, I just needed the truth. And the truth doesn't need an audience, only courage. Security entered the room moments later, accompanied by 2 federal investigators. Evelyn had already shared the files with authorities that morning. The timing was deliberate, poetic, even. Marcus tried to stand, but his composure shattered. You can't do this, he shouted as the agents placed cuffs around his wrists. You can't just erase me. Nathan's eyes were steady. No, Marcus, you erased yourself. As they led him away, the room remained frozen, 12 people witnessing the cost of ambition without integrity. After the chaos settled, the board turned to Nathan. Mr. Caldwell, Dr. Patel said, now that. Hale is under investigation. We'll need your leadership to stabilize the company. He smiled faintly. No, you won't? Confusion flickered across their faces. You're declining, someone asked. Nathan rose, straightened his jacket, and looked around the room that had once been his empire. For 30 years, I believed control was the only way to protect what mattered. But control is just fear wearing a tie. I've had enough of it. He placed his resignation letter on the table. Caldwell Systems doesn't need me anymore. It needs people who remember why we built it, not what it cost to keep it. There was a long silence. No one tried to stop him. As he reached the doorway, he turned to Evelyn. Their eyes met, unspoken gratitude passing between them. You saved more than my name, he said quietly. You saved me from becoming him. She smiled through quiet tears. No, Nathan, you saved yourself the moment you stopped fighting for power and started fighting for truth. Later, as they stepped out of the building together, the rain began to fall soft, cleansing. Nothing like the storm that had once torn through Coral Bay. Cameras flashed from across the street. Reporters shouting questions, neither of them answered. Nathan didn't flinch this time. He simply reached for Evelyn's hand, not to claim, not to protect, but to steady. They walked toward the waiting car, not as scandal or redemption, but as 2 people finally free of what had defined them. What now? Evelyn asked quietly. Now Nathan smiled. Now. We start living. He glanced back at the towering glass building one last time, the monument to everything he'd once believed mattered. And for the first time in his life, he felt no pull to return. He had finally learned to let go, not out of defeat, but love. Seattle faded behind him like the end of a long, restless dream. Nathan watched the city shrink through the airplane window, the skyline of glass and steel, the river slicing through it like a scar. He had once thought that place was his heartbeat, the rhythm of his purpose, but now, as the plane ascended through a layer of pale clouds, he felt only relief. When he landed back in Coral Bay, the air was warm and heavy with salt. The horizon shimmered gold, and the world smelled of something he hadn't known in years, peace. He rented a small house near the dunes, a weathered place with creaky floors and a screened porch that looked out onto the sea. The walls were bare except for one thing, a framed photograph of the art center, taken during the fundraiser. The sunlight in the picture was almost too bright, like the memory itself refused to fade. In the weeks that followed, Nathan learned the quiet rhythms of Coral Bay. He walked the beach at dawn, the sand cool beneath his bare feet. He made coffee slowly, listening to the low hum of the waves instead of conference calls. He read books he'd bought decades ago but never opened. Sometimes he'd help at the harbor, mending nets with fishermen who didn't care what his name used to mean. They called him Nate, not Mr. Caldwell. It felt right lighter somehow. When people in town recognized him from the headlines, they didn't ask for stories. They just nodded, as if to say, "We all have storms behind us." The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was healing. Evelyn, meanwhile, returned to her art classes. The children greeted her with paint-streaked hands and wide smiles, as if nothing had ever happened. She spent her mornings teaching them how to mix colors, her afternoons helping them shape clay into wild, joyful forms. The community that had once turned cold slowly came back, one warm gesture at a time. She never spoke of the scandal. She didn't need to. The truth had already spoken for her. Sometimes, when she stayed late to lock up, she would glance toward the window, half expecting to see Nathan's reflection there watching quietly, the way he always had. But he never came. Instead, once every few days, a small envelope would appear in the art center's mailbox, no name on the outside, just a folded note within. The ocean was calm this morning. The pelicans followed the boat in a perfect line. You would have loved it, or another "I fixed a leaky roof tile today." You'd laugh if you saw me holding a hammer again. She never replied in writing, but once, she sent a small watercolor painting through the post, a sunrise over the sea. Simple and bright. No words. Just light. Nathan kept it on his kitchen counter. They saw each other only in passing at the farmer's market, at the cafe, along the beach. Their conversations were brief, gentle, no grand declarations, no confessions. How's the art center full of chaos and crayons? Good chaos, I hope. The best kind? He would smile, she would nod, and they'd part ways with the comfort of knowing they didn't have to fill the silence anymore. Sometimes, as he walked home, Nathan thought about what they'd shared, the years of tension, misunderstanding, forgiveness. There was no perfect ending to it, but maybe perfection had never been the point. He'd once believed love needed to be loud, marked by promises, measured by permanence. Now, he understood it could be quiet. It could live in gestures, in respect, in peace. Summer drifted into fall. The sea grew rougher, the skies softer. Nathan kept to his routines: morning walks, afternoon reading, evening letters he never sent. In one of those letters, he wrote, "I used to chase success the way a man chases sunlight through glass, always reaching, never touching. But now I wake up to the sound of the sea. And I realize maybe life was never about catching anything. Maybe it's about standing still long enough to see what's already there." He folded the letter and placed it in a drawer with the others' quiet testaments to a heart-learning patience. He didn't need her to read them. Writing them was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Evelyn sat on the porch of her cottage, watching gulls scatter across the waves. She thought of the years she'd spent trying to be small, efficient, composed, invisible. Nathan had once seen her as part of the machinery of his world, but in the end, he'd helped her see herself beyond it. Now, when the wind rustled through the palm leaves, she imagined it carrying all the noise of the past away. What was left behind was simple the sound of peace settling into her bones. In late autumn, the town hosted its annual harvest fair. Nathan was there, helping Mrs. Langford serve pies. Evelyn arrived later, carrying a basket of handmade pottery for the charity booth. Their eyes met across the crowd, familiar, steady, kind. They didn't rush toward each other. They didn't need to. Later, when the fair began to wind down, she found him sitting by the pier, watching the sun melt into the water. She sat beside him, close but not touching. For a while, they said nothing. The light shifted, turning everything gold. "I read your letters," she said softly. He turned, startled. You always forgot to seal the envelopes." He smiled, a quiet laugh escaping. "Guess I wanted you to find them." She looked out at the horizon. "I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you wanted me to." A long pause. The sound of gulls faded with the tide. "Some endings," she said finally. "Don't need closure." "No." He agreed. "Just peace." They sat together until the last light vanished, the silence between them as gentle as the waves against the shore. A full year had passed since the storm. Coral Bay had lived through another summer long. Golden days. Children's laughter echoing over the dunes. Salt in the air that clung to everything. The town had gone back to its gentle rhythm, as if nothing extraordinary had ever happened. But for Nathan Caldwell, everything had changed. He had learned how to live small, to wake with the sunrise instead of alarms, to fix the squeaky porch step himself, to buy peaches at the market and actually taste them. He had stopped keeping track of time by meetings and quarters. Now, he measured life by the sound of the waves and the letters he didn't send. And yet, as September's warmth began to fade, a thought began to tug quietly at him like the tide calling something back. It had been a year since he last stepped inside the Coral Bay Art Center. A year since the scandal. Since forgiveness. Since he and Evelyn had stood together at the pier watching the light fade. He told himself he was just curious. But truth rarely disguises itself for long. That morning, he walked the familiar path along the shore, the one lined with sea grapes and worn fences. His shoes gathered sand. His shirt caught the smell of salt and paint that drifted faintly on the breeze. The art center came into view, freshly painted in soft white, the sign above the door newly redone Coral Bay Art for All. He hesitated outside the gate. Children's laughter spilled out through the open windows. Inside, brushes clattered, and a radio played something cheerful and old. He took a slow breath and stepped in. The sunlight inside the room was golden and warm, filtering through lace curtains that swayed gently in the breeze. On the far wall, dozens of paintings hung bright colors, bold lines, joyful imperfection. And at the front of the class stood Evelyn Moore. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with silver that caught the light. She wore a linen apron splattered with blues and greens. Around her, children bent over easels, tongues peeking from concentration. "Remember," she said, her voice soft but sure, "you're not painting a face. You're painting how it feels to look at someone you care about." The children giggled. One boy shouted, "Like my dog, exactly." She laughed. "Especially your dog." Nathan smiled from the doorway, unnoticed for a moment. He watched the easy way she moved, calm, patient, grounded in a world that finally fit her. Then he saw it an easel near the window, a half-finished painting left alone. The subject was a man's face, not quite defined, the strokes soft and uncertain. A hint of gray hair, a thoughtful gaze, not perfect, but unmistakable. His breath caught. Evelyn turned just then and saw him. Her hand stilled midair, the brush hovering above the palette. For a long moment she didn't move. The children followed her gaze. "Miss Moore?" one asked. She smiled gently. "Keep painting," she said. Then she set down her brush and crossed the room. Nathan removed his hat, suddenly unsure what to say. "You're early," she said softly. He blinked. "For what? For your portrait? It's not finished yet." He smiled. That slow, quiet kind of smile that carried 1,000 unsent letters. "I didn't know I had one." "You've been here all along," she said, nodding toward the easel. "The kids asked who you were. I told them you were a friend who helped build this place." He looked around. The room was alive laughter, colors, life. "You did more than rebuild it. You made it new." "We both did," she said gently. They stood in silence for a while. The children painted on, oblivious to the history standing quietly among them. Outside, the sea shimmered in the distance, steady and endless. "You came back," she said at last. "I wasn't sure I should," he admitted. "And yet you did." He looked at her, really looked. The lines around her eyes told stories not of pain, but of endurance. She looked peaceful, steady, whole. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "What?" "The chaos, the pace, the world we came from." She thought for a moment. "Sometimes," she said honestly. "But then I look at them." She nodded toward the children, and I remember that noise doesn't always mean life. He chuckled softly. "You always did know how to make simple things sound profound." "No," she said, smiling. "I just finally stopped trying to complicate them." Their eyes met not as they had in boardrooms or storms, but as equals in stillness. A girl nearby waved a paintbrush. "Miss Moore, can he sit for me?" Evelyn laughed. "Ask him yourself." Nathan crouched beside the easel. "I'd be honored," he said. The little girl grinned and dipped her brush. "You've got kind eyes," she said matter-of-factly. "Do I?" he asked. "Yep. People with kind eyes don't sit still for long." Evelyn met his gaze over the child's head, her smile deepening. She might be right about that. He laughed, a low, warm sound that filled the room. For the next few minutes, he sat quietly while the children painted, their chatter rising and falling like the tide. He didn't speak, and he didn't need to. The air felt complete, like everything broken had finally found its place again. When the girl finished, she handed him the painting proudly. It was messy, uneven, too bright and beautiful. "It's perfect," he said softly. When the class ended, the children ran out into the sunlight, leaving only the two of them in the soft afterglow of laughter. Evelyn walked to the window, looking out at the sea. "Do you ever think," she said quietly, "that maybe we needed all of it, the noise, the storms, the loss, just to find this?" He stepped beside her, hands in his pockets. "Maybe peace only makes sense when you've lived without it." The wind carried the scent of salt and paint. Outside, gulls wheeled across the sky. They didn't need to say anything more. Evelyn turned back toward the unfinished portrait. "I'll finish it someday," she said. "No rush," he replied. "I like it unfinished. Feels more like life that way." She smiled, and as the light streamed through the open windows, soft, golden, forgiving they stood there together, not as people haunted by their past, but as two souls who had learned to let the silence speak for them. Some endings don't need words, just peace. 2 years later, Coral Bay looked almost the same soft stretch of sand, the same salt wind whispering through the palms, the same slow rhythm that wrapped the town in calm. But something new had taken root here. At the far edge of town, on a small hill overlooking the ocean, stood a freshly painted building with bright blue shutters and a wide front porch. Above the door hung a wooden sign carved by hand, the Moore Caldwell Community Art Center for every child with a dream. It wasn't large. It didn't need to be. Inside, the walls were alive with color finger paintings, clay sculptures, watercolor sunsets made by hands too small to care about perfection. The air smelled of tempera paint, lemonade, and the kind of laughter that can only belong to children. And in the middle of it all stood Evelyn Moore and Nathan Caldwell, side by side, watching it come alive. Evelyn stood near the window, sunlight washing across her face as she helped a little boy shape clay into what he proudly called a flying fish. Nathan was across the room, adjusting the hanging of a new mural the older kids had finished the week before a swirl of blues and golds that looked like waves in motion. Every so often, they'd catch each other's eye from across the room. No words passed between them. Just the quiet exchange of understanding that comes from people who've already said everything that mattered. When the children went home in the afternoon, leaving behind smudged brushes and the faint echo of giggles, they stayed behind to clean up. Nathan rinsed pallets at the sink while Evelyn stacked easels by the wall. "Remember when you couldn't even hold a hammer straight?" she teased, smiling over her shoulder. "I've improved," he said, turning off the tap. "Turns out humility is a decent teacher." "You've learned faster than most," she said softly. He looked around the studio at the walls covered in small hands art, at the open windows framing the ocean beyond. "It's strange," he murmured. "I used to think legacy meant leaving your name on something. Now it just feels like making space for others to create theirs." Evelyn paused, her voice a whisper. "Maybe that's what love is too." He turned to her, curious. "How do you mean?" "It's not about holding on," she said. "It's about giving room for someone to grow and still choosing to stay close enough to watch." Nathan smiled. "You always manage to say what I spend years trying to understand." She laughed quietly. Occupational hazard of being a teacher. Later that evening, after locking up, they walked down to the beach. The air was cool, filled with the rhythmic hush of waves against the shore. The horizon burned faintly pink, fading to silver as the first stars appeared. Nathan carried 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to Evelyn, and they sat side by side on a driftwood log, watching the tide roll in. For a long time, neither spoke. The sound of the ocean filled the spaces where words used to live. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked at last. "What the company," she said. "The rush of it all. The noise." Evelyn thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But only because it reminds me how far we've come." He nodded slowly, tracing the rim of his mug. "I used to think love was possession, that if you cared about something, you had to hold it, define it, claim it." He glanced toward her, his voice softer now. "But now I think love is just presence, the quiet kind, being there, even when there's nothing left to prove." Evelyn smiled, turning toward him. "Maybe that's what all this is, presence made visible." She gestured toward the art center behind them, glowing faintly under the moonlight. In the months after Marcus's fall, Nathan had been offered countless ways to rebuild his career consulting. Lectures, board positions. He turned them all down. Instead, he poured what remained of his fortune into something new, the Art Center. Evelyn had hesitated at first, wary of the attention it might bring, but Nathan's insistence was simple and steady. "You gave me back my humanity," he'd told her. "Let me give these kids a chance to find theirs early." Now, the center served not just Coral Bay, but neighboring towns. It offered free art classes, mentorship programs, and meals for children from struggling families. Every inch of it carried their shared fingerprints, his structure, her soul. The local paper had written a small piece about its opening, from scandal to sanctuary. Evelyn had smiled when she read it. They finally got the story right. That night, after Evelyn went inside, Nathan lingered on the porch. The moon hung low over the waves, full and patient. He took out an old leather-bound notebook and flipped to a page he'd left blank for months. Then, with slow, careful strokes, he began to write, "Evelyn, I used to believe that life gave us second chances only when we fought hard enough for them. But I've learned that sometimes they arrive when we finally stop fighting, when we learn to listen, to forgive, to stay still long enough for peace to find us. Maybe love isn't about possession. It's about presence. The way the sea stays even when the tide changes. The way silence can hold more truth than words. Whatever comes next, thank you for walking beside me, not as the woman I once failed to understand, but as the person who taught me how to see again." Nathan. He didn't tear out the page. He didn't seal it in an envelope. He just closed the notebook and placed it on the windowsill, where the morning sun would find it. The next day, children returned to the center, flooding the halls with laughter and noise. Nathan and Evelyn stood outside, greeting each one as they arrived, a small parade of color and hope. A boy ran up, holding a shell he'd found. "Look," he said proudly. "It's shaped like a heart." Evelyn bent down, smiling. "Then keep it safe. The ocean doesn't make many of those." Nathan watched her, the way she bent to listen, the way her presence made the world gentle. When she stood, he reached for her hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, like something long destined to fit. They turned toward the horizon. The sun was rising, gold spilling across the water, waves folding over one another in a slow, steady rhythm. No promises, no declarations, just peace. As the morning light bathed them, Nathan squeezed her hand lightly. "You know," he said, his voice low, "for years I thought the sea was endless, and now I think it just leads us home." She leaned her head against his shoulder. The waves rolled on calm, rhythmic, eternal. And there, standing hand in hand by the shore they had both returned to, they finally understood. Some stories don't end. They simply become still. The sea was quiet that evening, a mirror of gold and silver reflecting the last blush of daylight. Somewhere along the beach, laughter from the art center drifted through the warm air, children finishing their paintings. Evelyn's voice calling goodnight, the echo of brushes being rinsed in tin cups, and a little further down the shore, Nathan sat on the old driftwood log they'd claimed as their spot. His hands rested on his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon where the ocean met the fading light. The world had grown smaller for him, no boardrooms, no headlines, no wealth to measure worth by. Yet in this smallness, he had found something vast: stillness, love, and the unshakable truth of who he had become. The narrator's voice enters, gentle and warm, the tone of someone remembering, not reporting, There was a time when Nathan Caldwell believed that power could shield him from pain, that money could purchase meaning, that success was the same as peace. He built towers to touch the sky, but never learned how to stand still long enough to feel the ground beneath his feet. Until one day, the world he built collapsed not from failure, but from the weight of his own silence, and in the wreckage, he met himself again. Nathan rose and began walking along the shore, the sand cool under his feet. Each wave that reached him dissolved softly around his ankles before retreating back to the sea. He paused where the water glittered in the twilight and smiled faintly, hearing Evelyn's laughter echo faintly from the art center. "Maybe love isn't about possession," he had once told her. "It's about presence." And now, looking out at the open sea, he understood what that meant more deeply than ever. Love had never been the storm that tore through his life. It was the calm that came after, the quiet choice to stay, to forgive, to keep showing up. He had spent half a lifetime chasing everything the world told him mattered, only to realize that the richest moments came not from what he owned, but from what he was finally willing to feel. Sometimes, the richest man is the one who finally learns to feel. As night descended, the lights from the community center began to glow soft yellow through the windows, like lanterns guiding the lost back home. Inside, children's paintings lined the walls, oceans, sunsets, people holding hands. Among them hung a single portrait, a man and a woman standing by the shore, faces turned toward the light. It was unfinished, just like life, but it carried something whole. On the porch, Evelyn joined Nathan, slipping her hand into his as they watched the stars appear. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The narrator's voice continues. Love didn't make them perfect. It made them honest. It didn't erase their past. It gave it meaning. And that's what peace truly is, not the absence of storms, but the courage to stand in the rain and still choose light. The waves rolled on, steady as breath, soft as forgiveness. Here, the story quiets. The music fades into something tender and reflective. The narrator turns toward you, the listener, the one who has followed every beat of this journey. We all carry our own storms. We all have someone we left behind, or something we couldn't fix. But maybe, like Nathan, we're not meant to rebuild what was lost. Maybe we're meant to build something new, gentler, truer from what remains. Because love, at its heart, isn't about grand gestures or perfect endings. It's about the small, ordinary moments that remind us we're still capable of kindness, of connection, of starting again. The sea darkens to ink. The wind softens. Nathan and Evelyn stand together by the shore, their silhouettes framed by moonlight. Around them, the sound of the ocean fills the silence, endless, forgiving, whole. Evelyn looks up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you think it ever really ends?" Nathan smiles, eyes reflecting the stars. "No. I think some stories just learn to breathe differently. They stay like that, two figures against an endless sky until the waves swallow their footprints and the world feels brand new again. If you've come this far, maybe this story touched something inside you, a memory, a regret, a hope still waiting to be seen. Maybe it reminded you that even after loss, after storms, after silence, love doesn't disappear. It transforms. So tonight, wherever you are, I hope you remember this. You are not what you've lost. You are what you've learned to feel. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to open your heart one more time, not because you're unbroken, but because you're willing to love anyway. The waves rise once more, slow and steady. The music swells gently soft piano, fading strings. If this story touched your heart, rate it below and tell us what's the bravest thing you've ever done for love. In a world that praises success, we often forget what truly matters. Nathan Caldwell's journey reminds us that wealth and power mean little if the heart remains empty. It took losing everything: his company, his pride, his control, for him to finally discover peace in the simplest things: kindness, humility, and presence. Evelyn's quiet strength teaches us another truth: that dignity and compassion can outlast any storm. She didn't fight with anger. She rebuilt with grace. Together, they showed that love isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's found in silence, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again. Maybe life's real richness isn't in what we own, but in what we understand: the people we cherish, the peace we protect, and the moments we truly feel. So slow down, listen more, hold less, and love better. Because in the end, like Nathan learned, the richest life is not built by power, but by presence. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. If Nathan and Evelyn's story touched your heart, if it reminded you of love, forgiveness, or the quiet courage it takes to begin again, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments what moment in your life taught you the true meaning of love. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Shining Stories, where every week we bring you heartfelt tales that celebrate humanity, dignity, and hope. Because sometimes one story can change the way we see life and each other.